Isaac, start the camera.
It is.
Years, I mean, all this time, before COVID.
Well, welcome tonight to this presentation of the History Lives speaker series that we put on here at the Dickinson County Museum. We are so thrilled to have so many here tonight, and we're especially thrilled to have John Smeltzer as our speaker tonight. He has uncovered facts and breadcrumbs and tidbits of information that hasn't been uncovered before about Templar Park, and it's really, I'm so glad you're here. It is really going to be good tonight. I wanted to share with you the mission statement of our little museum here. Our mission is inspiring engagement by preserving the past. And it goes on that the Dickinson County Museum, in a century-old depot, provides unique educational experiences based on authentic objects, stories, and lives from Dickinson County. Our purpose is to inspire people to learn through public programs, publications, educational activities, and special events, like tonight. So this is a big part of fulfilling our mission. These, as you can probably tell from the state of the chairs and how we have to move everything around here, our budget is pretty low. We kind of run on a shoestring, but we run well on that shoestring. If you are of a mind to make a donation tonight, we do have a donation box out here. We also welcome memberships, and we do have some membership forms out here. That's another great way to support the museum. In case you need them, the bathroom is right through this room, or in the next room, second door over, and we do have an additional exit out this way. We are open in the winter on Wednesdays from 10 to 4, and we offer on Wednesday mornings a conversation group called Way Back When, which is so fun. We have a group of 10 to 15 to 18 people that get together and just talk about the old days around the area, and we never know where the conversation's going, but it's always really, really good. I think that's it. John Smeltzer could be called John Spirit Lake for all he's doing here in the area. He's terrifically involved with the Spirit Lake Protective Association and really just about anything that happens in the Spirit Lake area. And we're so appreciative of that.
At least the history stuff.
Yes.
And a little bit of, thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So I'm going to turn down the lights a bit. Are you ready for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just leave that one set on.
Okay.
That'll be perfect.
And if there's any problem with the changing screens, it's my fault. I'm the official clicker tonight. It's a daunting task.
Well, we don't have things set up perfectly, but like Mary says, the budget's low, and you always get what you pay for, right? So that's part of the reason that she catches me all the time. I did a program here back several months ago now, I guess, on Fred Gilbert. And I've picked the things that are kind of my local passions, but also, as Mary suggested, one of the things that myself and my wife, who's also here, are board members on Spirit Lake Protective Association. So anything that's kind of around the curtilage of Big Spirit Lake is something that really is near and dear to me. My experience here in the lakes area goes back to the mid-1970s, fortunately just before the demise of the building of Templar Park, but after, of course, the actual Templar Park Resort closed. And so I was always intrigued by it. And that's part of the reason that I have been interested. But we also now, in a more contemporary sense, are really interested in it because we think it's an underutilized area around Big Spirit Lake and needs to have some attention. And that there are a lot of things that could be done, things that need to be done, things that are historic in nature, things that are innovative in nature that Spirit Lake Protective Association is interested in now. And so as we were starting to talk about what to call this particular program, it's then and now, Templar Park, then and now. And the way I've created the imagery here that you see is the old photograph of the arch, built in 1926, we'll talk more in depth about, going into Templar Park. Because as you, in most of its life, really were able to do is everything of excitement was through that arch into Templar Park along the beach and the like. Now, what you have left really is only the iconic set of steps on the shoreline, and then you also have the arch. And this is out the arch. Which way do you turn is really my thought. Where do we go from here? And I think both of those elements really help set up this concept of Templar Park here and now, then and now. For context, I don't know exactly everybody's familiarity with the lake. I picked this older map, actually a map that probably predates me in some ways. But for context, and one of the things I want to try to do with the information on this is start out in an early day, come to a more of a contemporary time and put it in context. And the beginnings of Templar Park really starts down here in the Orleans area at the Orleans Hotel. And that's an important piece to keep in mind. And the relationship between these two locations shouldn't be underestimated. Templar Park, of course, right here in the southwest corner. Stevens Cove, right now a very large and important residential area. And then most of this area right here now owned by the state of Iowa, with a small portion, Templar Park North, Templar Park South, it's private. Next slide. So, as I suggested, it all started really with the Orleans Hotel. The Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and Northern Railroad, bringing to northwest Iowa and to the South Shore of Spirit Lake this very first 1883 iconic Orleans Hotel. It was in 4 different configurations over its lifetime, but the most important one for the life of Templar Park was this one. The majesty of it, and it came courtesy of the railroad. And the railroad in 1883 was trying to make sure that they had enough traffic to keep this thing alive. And so, next slide. They also brought the Queen. The Queen was on Spirit Lake, first 5 years of its life. It came on the Burlington, Cedar Rapids, Northern Railroad, to the Orleans Hotel, where it was put in right about where we currently have the boat ramp. And was on the lake for roughly 5 years. I don't know precisely, but I can document 5 years. And as you say here, it says, there has been delivered to the lake shore by the hotel company a fine new iron steam yacht built at a cost of $6,500. 1883 money. It's 76 feet long with a 15-foot beam and will accommodate, and I think it says 30 persons. The hull and the machinery were constructed in the Iowa Iron Works of Dubuque, the cabinet in the car shops of Cedar Rapids. The latter is excellently and even elaborately finished. The gallant craft will be known as the Queen, and she will press the fair bosom of the lovely Spirit Lake from and after July 1st. So July 1st, 1883 really is the date when this first starts. The Hotel Orleans has been leased to the Hutchinsons for a term of 5 years. The present season he will be absent much of the time owing to his connection with the Lake Park Hotel in Minnetonka, but will afterwards give the Orleans his exclusive attention. So what's happening is the stage is being set for the building of a very important industry here on the South Shore of Spirit Lake at Orleans Hotel. Next slide. Now, when I do this stuff, I'm a genealogist as well. And one of the things I'm always looking for is a hook. I want to find out if there's any way that I can tie myself to this whole deal. And I'll just keep this one short. But in 1885, when the land was given at Templar Park to the Knights Templar, he was the Grand Commander of the Knights Templar, and he's my third cousin.
That's a connection.
Next slide.
John, I hate to do this, but we need to stop this for just a second. We've gotten a message that we are not live streaming. We've got it set up, but they think there's something going on, that it's not actually going over the airwaves.
Okay, so go ahead and start it again.
Okay?
we won't repeat.
Technology is great. Okay. What,
Okay, so we'll go over this one a couple times, but basically this is an 1885, and you probably, many of you can probably read that. It actually talks about the focus that's being given to Templar Park by the commander of the commandery of the Knights Templar in Iowa. But I'll lose my focus here, so we'll go wait till the live stream comes back alive.
okay.
Now it's live.
Okay.
You think we got it?
Yeah, we're using one account.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome to the live stream. Sorry that you've missed the most important parts of the evening, but if you want to hang around, we'll probably be able to go back and cover a few in the question and answer session. So where we're at right now, we're looking at 1885, and what's happened with the Orleans Hotel and the Queen on the lake. It's now 1885, and they're trying to find a way to build the interest in all of that. And in talking to others, one of the things that the Knights Templar wanted to do, they wanted to actually go over to Westlake, and they wanted to actually acquire Fort Dodge Point, the entire point, to build their commandery on. And the Burlington Cedar Rapids Northern Railroad, who had just spent buku dollars on the Orleans Hotel and the Queen, said, you're going to do it on Spirit Lake. And so they went ahead and they actually worked with the citizenry of Spirit Lake. They also worked with some of the local hotels, including the Orleans Hotel, I'm sure the Antlers. And they bought the land on Templar Park, the first 20 acres, and gave it to the Knights Templar in about 1885. And that's why 1885 is significant. And the group, once they received the land, had to make a board level commitment at the state level that they were actually going to do investments in it. And they did that in 1885, and it was actually published in Spirit Lake Beacon and in some of their major reports. And so that became important for them as an effort going forward. Next slide. For about 6 years, you end up with a period of time when they didn't do anything of significance. And part of what this, in its detail, all found in the Spirit Lake Beacon, is really telling us is that there was disappointment in the local community that they had taken really little action to really prove anything out. And so the complaints were starting to come out publicly. And that's what this is doing. But at their meeting in Grand Commandery, appointed the next council to have a conclave on August 19th of 1890 on a large track. A large tent will be pitched on Templar Point, in which the meeting will be held. Attendants will probably pitch private tents. The Orleans Hotel has made a very low rate to the Sir Knights and families, and the steamer Okoboji, or Queen, will trip between the Orleans Point on special terms. So by 1890, they've made an agreement to do it, but it's just a bare piece of land. And when we see the photos a little bit later, what you'll see is it's a swamp with a hill behind it. That's basically what it was. And you can imagine these folks coming in their pomp and circumstance to a hill into a tent in 1890. They weren't real happy probably about it, so it quickly changed. Next slide. But they brought their families, they pitched tents, and they were there, and they report that fun was had by all, but I think the Orleans Hotel was probably the happiest because that's probably where everybody was at most of the time. Next slide. So the first building that was actually built, the money of $2,250 was appropriated for this first building for that 1891 subsequent year conclave, and it was the first one that was held in a building. It was 80 feet long, 32 feet wide, it had verandas on 2 floors. There was a basement used for storage for tents and boats. They spent an additional $1,500 to do a kitchen and to drill a well, and by 1898, a tornado came and blew it down. And they built it. Well, we'll show you here. Go to the next slide. We'll show the image a little better. I actually got this image out of the Spirit Lake Beacon. It was published, was published in May of 1891 as the image of what the first building was going to look like. I don't have any imagery photographically to show that in this configuration yet, but I keep looking for it. Anybody who might have some, be more than happy to take it. Next slide. So the first imagery that we have that actually shows kind of the next phase of the whole building, but also demonstrates, as you can see here, the swamp nature of all the access points. These are places we all know well if you know where Templar Point's at. And if you've been there, we've driven across that same area multiple times. But literally, where this is at right now is off to the north side of the main road. And we'll show you a little bit more graphically here later. The building, rather than being 2 stories, is now 3 stories. You can't see it very well, but over a period of several years, this was built as the first piece, and then there were wings that basically had the large size configuration and ultimately became 150 bedrooms, and this area was largely the kitchen area later on. I included this little one because it has an interesting note of the period. I think this was dated 1906. It says, "I'll be at Esterville Tuesday p.m. on the Rock Island train that leaves Spirit Lake at 5:15. Meet me if it is convenient fare." Postcards used to communicate. Didn't have Instagram, didn't have Facebook Live, almost didn't have pencils. So these were used a lot to communicate between here and Esterville. Go figure. But as you find early postcards, that's one of the deals. A little closer view gives you an idea. This motor car, probably about a 1908, 1909 motor car. Very nice, clothing. Quite a storied building. A lot of stonework that was there. I'm sure that the concrete Dean was not quite up to snuff. Next. One of the interesting things that you'll find if you walk up there is that every year they had a new commander, and one day my wife and I were walking along and we just stumbled upon this little rock. And it had the name Cyrus Eaton, past Grand Commander. Curious about it, did a little bit of digging, and you find this little story on the right side and it was in the Beacon, because in 1894, the then Grand Commander, standing on the point, said, "I think something's basically going to happen to me soon, and if something happens to me, put a rock here with my name on it." And they did. And the rock's still there. At least now, hopefully somebody doesn't end up taking it. But a fellow by the name of Cyrus Eaton, significant in the development of the early Templar Park. Next slide. So we find a postcard. Postcards are one of the early things that you find that give you any imaging. This particular one is interesting because if you notice, the photograph is taken above the trees. And it's postmarked 1907. Now, what happened in 1909 that changed the way the world operates? We had the first airplane in 1909. This is 1907. They're above the trees. They don't have hydraulic elevators or stuff. They're in a hot air balloon on the South Shore, somewhere. Probably down by Virgie's, old Virgie's South Side, maybe down in Stevens Cove, up on a platform in a balloon, taking a picture of Templar Park and the pavilion, the Templar Point, which was formerly known as Kingman Point. And if you're familiar with that whole area, the Kingman home still exists up on that east or west side of the lake. It's one of the majestic homes there. I'm sure it's been upgraded quite a bit since, but it's just down the way here, and they owned much of this west side, and that's the land was purchased from them. Next slide. So the configuration of the next Templar Park building, if you can kind of see, this structure is like that 3-story piece that we saw earlier. This is actually the residential side, and it actually sits almost in the same configuration as the one that was later on that was built out of concrete that we all kind of know. The first pavilion, all wood, all wood. And so as we sat and started talking about kind of this timeline, the first one got blown down. The second one got burnt down. The Three Little Pigs. It's the same story. Maybe that's where the story of the Three Little Pigs came from. But they actually built the third one out of concrete, plaster, and tile. And they didn't want that one to blow down. Next slide. This is an up close. You can see that it has lapboard siding. It's all wood construction. Next slide. But
Oh, no.
it burnt down. June 1917. This particular image, this image has some comparables. You'll see one down here that actually is actually displayed. But this one is probably one that is being seen for the first time this evening publicly. Mary Dreyer and her family had an album that included some of these that were actually taken by family members. And so you actually see a fairly nice view of what would have been the June 1917 fire in the top image that destroyed the entire complex and burnt down what was described as over 200 trees up on the hill. And down here, probably one from the winter before, because there's no leaves on the trees, giving you an idea of where the little cottages were being built and where the various buildings were sitting at the time. Next slide. A little bit closer view of the fire. It had to be pretty nasty because when you go to the next slide, you find that when it was done, the trees were sticks and all that was left was the masonry. Next slide. Purpose of this one was to show that the acquisition of this particular property may have had a significant impact on the size of the activity of the Knights Templar themselves, because when the property was acquired in Iowa, there were 3,500 registered members of the group. And by 1914, before this one burnt down, there were 7,000. So they doubled in size in not too long a period of time. I think that was significant, and this just speaks to that. Next slide. Okay, so in June 17, it burns down. They go, whoa, we got to do something. And so a new one's being built, and here's an image that, again, hasn't seen much public view, that's actually showing the construction of the next version of the Templar Park. I want to do the Orleans Hotel one so bad. And when it was completed during the summer of 1918, finished in the fall of 1918, opened in June of 1919. And as you can see, the viewscapes are quite open, and the trees are still quite burnt. Had not recovered fully. And it looked like, actually, as you see this image, that they actually had probably continued to burn, or maybe by accident burned off the hillsides. But it was a new fireproof home, and it was one of the things that they touted. It cost $100,000 to build that building, and it had $35,000 worth of furniture included in it. Next. So I'm going to go through a series of kind of the views that you might have had of it over the years. The iconic staircases remain, but were put in place in 1919. So you have, or right after the building and the building, are 102, 103 years old, and are one of the things that, as we've talked about, we would like to see hopefully maintained, but we know that there's at least a chance that they're damaged beyond repair, but we want to check that out as a group around Spear Lake. Next one. Over the years, of course, the lake goes up and down. Obviously, it's down a little bit here. The view space changes significantly. The activity along the shoreline is different. Next slide. So, 1920, high water year, very high water year. obviously to the lake, but you can see the water along the shoreline is right up to the buildings, right up to the base of the stairs. There's this huge series of marshes behind it to the west. The road extends over here, and what you'll see later on is that road actually was completely removed and a new road configured 400 feet to the south. The other things that you can see that are identifiable: Marble Lake, West Hodis, the state area now that's absolutely completely marsh. Back up into this area here is where the state wildlife area is operating, and of course Marble Lake itself with a lot of, but gravel road, not too many trees, pretty much open, and the pavilion already in place. Next slide, that's 1920. This just gives you a front view. Next slide, let's jump through that one. Next slide. Another image of the road itself in its old configuration, dated 1921. The stairs in place, the lake down a little bit, away from the shoreline a bit. Still quite a bit of water, but not as much on this side as there had been. Next slide. And now what we see in one dated 1924, just 3 years later, the road still is in place here, which was the original, but the one that you and I know is starting to run off over here in 1924. And what we start to see is we start to see this area now completely filled in. This area looking like it's pretty largely filled in. The hotel's still in it's pretty much its configuration. The viewscape that now is completely cleaned from about here on down is all treed, and the trees have started to invade this area pretty seriously. That's 24. Next one. This is 29. And in 29, the significant thing that's happened is the old pavilion has been taken down and the new pavilion has been built. It was built in, there's paperwork that shows that it was torn down in September of 28 and rebuilt by 29. In a configuration very much like the building itself, pretty much all plaster, tile, and concrete. And you can see this area is completely filled in, and if you look real carefully, you can find a little bit of evidence of the old road across here, but by 29, that old road's pretty much gone away. Next slide. This one still shows the new road in a little bit of a different angle, but look how low the lake is. Look how far away it is from the pavilion. This is probably about a 1936 photo. And in about 1936, the lakes area were getting to be really at their lowest levels. There were those that talked about Center Lake being almost completely dry, that talk about the Sandbar Slough being completely dry, talk about the lake being at one of its lowest levels ever. So this image probably captures that a little bit, but you also see a couple things that are going on. One, the arch is now in place, built in 1926. And you also see the road configuration, and you also see the first evidence of the golf green. The golf course got put in there. We'll talk about it later. Next slide. And another view from a little bit different angle. Evidence of the road right through here. There's a green, or a part of the golf course itself. Not much image that we can tell on the lake height. Next slide. One of the things they did when they filled in those marshes, that it's almost impossible to tell now, this is immediately what used to be a hill immediately across the road from the arches on the west side. They took 30,000 cubic yards of material out of that area and literally destroyed the hill. And it says, this used to be a hill, but it's leveled to a large degree by the 30,000 yards of fill it provided for the Templar Park's grounds. After the dirt was taken from the above spot on the Walter White estate, black topsoil was replaced, and black topsoil was placed over the improved area at Templar Park, just to make that area nicer and make this area easier to farm, I'm sure. 1953 was that image. Next slide. This is just a little bit of the lakefront. One of the things I always found really interesting is they actually had their own slide. And this particular slide seems to be completely wooden. I don't know if I'd like to slide down it, but somebody seemingly did because it was there for quite some time. Next slide. A lot of bathing that went on. You can't really think of the number of people, but go to the next slide too.
Oh my.
I mean, we're talking lots of people on a dock, a fairly large, substantial dock out there. I counted one time, I think there was like 45 people that can be seen in various places in this particular image. So there are a lot of folks that actually utilize that waterfront, and the beach was really filled with sand for quite some time. Next slide. Again, the slide, but this must be about that 1936 period, because look here, you slide out here and you'd be in about 6 inches of water. Next slide. Interesting view for a lot of reasons. One, I'm sure the stairs are almost brand new and they were being inspected. But more importantly, 2 things. There was a wind charger that was actually here on the shoreline, and this right here and this right here are electrical lines. So that building had electricity probably as early as about 1919, 1920. And not REA by any means. The earliest of REA. And then this is actually a waterway that was created. I'm sure this was kind of a stop to kind of slow the water down before it got in the lake. But it came off the veranda, and they must have had plaster or concrete or something. There's some steel bars here to hold on to, probably somehow related. And look at this ladder. I wouldn't want to be the person who have to go up that. Next slide. A view of the front. This is the east side. Next slide. The current steps. This is the side we've cleaned off. This side still is pretty decadent. Next slide. Okay, so we're at a point in the program where we're going to transition back to Mary. And Mary's going to take charge, but we want to introduce the Max Pelzer family and Max in particular for a contribution that has recently been made to the museum. Mary, you're all yours.
Would you mind turning off the lights, John?
Yeah.
Last fall, something kind of miraculous happened for our museum that we're so appreciative of. We were accepting some donations from the Pelzer family, and I was with Sherry Pelzer, and she was on the phone with her brother, Scott, out in Colorado, and she was telling him that we were accepting some donations, and he said, would they like the light? And I didn't even know what she was talking about. And she started describing it to me. Her brother Scott sent me a photo. And this is what they have donated to us. Do you recognize it? Do you know what this is?
Isaac, advance that slide one. And one more. Other way. There you go. Right there. No, go one more. There you go. There. That's where I want it.
This was when my husband Gordon and John and I went to the Furman house where Tom and Sherry lived, and where Sherry's brother Scott had brought this light. And we picked it up that day and brought it to the museum. And it is magnificent. There's no other way to describe it. Just in the last week, we've put lights in it, and I'm crying just talking about it now. John, can you explain where this light was?
Well, go one more slide. I think I've got the next one on. Yeah. In the development of this arch in 1926, there was a standard that was established within it in the concrete to hold this light as a beacon back to and into Templar Park. And it stood then right here within the archway as really kind of the calling card for the Knights Templar to their home. And I'm surprised that they allowed it to get away, because it is such a significant item, both in the configuration of the arch as well as the significance to the Knights Templar. The wonder of it all is that Max Pelzer saved it, and his family returned. You want to say a few words?
I'm an attorney, so I can't say just a few.
Okay. His comment was he's an attorney, he can't say just a few words, so I suspect we're going to be here a moment, but that's okay. Max, you've got the floor.
I'm 90 years old, so it takes a while.
It's okay. We got all night. The sun's still up. It's daylight savings time.
Anybody find a cell phone? I'm sorry, but I lost my cell phone and I tracked it to a car over here. And actually
Just a few words about it. I suppose a lot of you were around.
Not anybody here.
There's somebody coming out.
Hold on a second.
Do you know where you lost it?
Yes, I live on 625th Street. And I was,
Okay,
I
thank you,
suppose
Jackson.
most of you were around whenever they tore down the old Templar Park, and for sure I was. And at the time when they had a sale, they had all the furniture and everything. Is anybody, probably some of you were here, my daughter Megan, her mother is one that you saw in the picture. Her dresser sold for $5. I bought probably a half a dozen of them for $20, $30 a piece. I don't know where they're all at now. You know, they were just little things they had in the little bitty rooms. And one of the things, of course, as you can see, is they were selling this thing. And because it was handmade, one of a kind, I said I could buy that because nobody else knew what to do with it. And to tell you the truth, I didn't know what to do with it because it went at auction and I got it bought for $100. And of course it was all full of bird poop and because it was a light, and then after it was shown hanging here, because they couldn't, the way I understand it, they couldn't get the things through, so they moved it over and it hung on the west side of Templar Park is where it was at. And of course all the birds and everything roosted in it. And I think I even replaced a couple of little things. But the reason I wanted it was because it's the only one of a kind. It was handmade by somebody. And I think it's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
And I gave it then to my son Scott, who lives out in Denver, Colorado, and it even went to Denver, Colorado for a little while. And then Sherry and Tom and Christopher, who's also part of my family. You guys know Christopher. And I think the rest of the family kind of talked Scott into saying, hey, why don't you just give it back to the museum? Because to tell you the truth, where in the hell would you hang that?
In a museum.
Cleaned it all up and did all that. Huh. I have one story to tell if I can. I told you I was an attorney and I can't shut up. Moss here, Earl?
Bill is. No, Earl's not.
No.
He's no relation.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I got to tell you one story about the pavilion. The pavilion was that thing right to the south of Templar Park. I had an attorney, and a client who came in one day and was so excited. He lived in one of the buildings, I think it was, yeah, south of Templar Park, in those houses along the way. He had purchased a pavilion. He was going to make a condominiums out of it or something. And I didn't say to him, I said, my God, what are you talking about? Because as you can see, the building was simply a brick thing. How would you even do it? I think he'd paid a few hundred for it. He had signed a contract, so we decided that we was going over to Spirit Lake to close on the thing. And of course, when you go to Spirit Lake, you always do everything at night, it seems like. I had a broken leg, and so my wife drove me over. And we met, and I was wondering where Earl was here, because I think Earl was even here at the time. Maybe not. But anyway, the idea was that he was going to buy that thing. And thank goodness I found out that it was zoned residential and got it stopped. If that wasn't a money pit, I never heard of it. And thank God, you know, we all hate zoning, but thank God for zoning. Otherwise, it would have turned into something I have no idea, but a lot of. But he was going to make condominiums or something out of it, which would have been impossible.
So you not only say that, but you saved this light, Max. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max. Very good. I'm sure there's at least 3 good deeds in there somewhere. You mentioned at least 2, but I bet there's a 3rd one in there too. You just have to remember it. We'll give you a moment here later on.
What's your name?
Bill Farkenswar. John Smith.
How do you spell it?
Next slide. So, this particular archway with the very wonderful light was created in 1926. It was a gift from a fellow that was part of the Grand Commandery and later to become the Grand Commander of Iowa for the Knights Templar, a fellow by the name of Ace Webster. Yeah, I was thinking Wheatley. Ace Webster. Ace Webster, actually, next slide. And you see configurations of it and combinations of trees, amazing. Don't have anything near that much for trees now. Next slide. This is the image that you saw looking out. Next slide. Yeah, Ace Webster. The Grand Commander of Iowa from 20 to 21, 1853 born. So the vintage of the people that were involved in that very early period were born 1830, 1840, 1850, in the establishment of what we know as the Templar Park. So we reach back from a historic perspective quite a ways. And he's buried actually in Spencer. 1928, we talked about the pavilion. This is the concrete structure that was built as the replacement pavilion. But that's the pavilion in its very first year of operation in 1929. Next slide. A lot of pomp and circumstance that occurred during the events that were on the grounds. A complete marching field, marching bands from the various high schools around the area, bands that had been invited in from various places. Did a lot of music playing, and I've actually had communications with a lot of folks who have actually played out on those fields. And maybe this evening some of you may be able to relate stories similarly. Next slide. The golf course. Started out as a 3-hole golf course. Went to a 6-hole golf course. Next slide. You start looking here, you can see at least 6 or 7. And the cars lined up all over the place. And you've got greens and putting and all sorts of stuff happening over the years. Next slide. And eventually, you've got a bill that tells that it's a 9-hole golf course. It has shuffleboards, they play tennis, there's badminton, ping pong, swimming, they played cards, and the pavilion was well known for its dancing. Lots of big music that was played in that pavilion, both versions of the pavilion. And Marla Swede actually contributed this at one point. She probably doesn't remember it precisely when, but she actually had several of these coasters that were used underneath some of the glasses on the table, and kindly gave one to us. Next slide. Not a real great slide. It's not an image that I have a whole lot of, but actually the hall within the middle of this portion of the building had grand staircases, wood floors, and you could just see that it had a lot of grandeur, and it was being advertised as a very grand place to come visit. Next slide. Dining room. I'm sure all of those chairs or many of those chairs are still around someplace. Next slide. One of the interesting things I found was a group of waitresses, 1940. They're described here in this postcard as the Templar Park singing waitresses. The backstory, next slide, actually made it into the Spirit Lake Beacon. And they spoke of this group of young ladies who were working for the group that they had to peel potatoes. They had to clean carrots, and they were coring strawberries. And while they did it, to while away the time, they started to sing. Well, someone said, you're really pretty good. And they actually became an act within the whole show. As dinner was being served, they'd come down and they would sing as part of their waitress duties. Probably at $1 an hour, the most. Next slide. Another interesting thing that I found is that Templar Park is to be made a bird sanctuary, according to preliminary plans made at the close of the Knights Templar Conclave last week, 1935. No, back up. The Iowa Conservation Commission, Dickinson County Board of Supervisors will cooperate with them. Now we have a purple martin colony there. Next. Some images from a family friend, the John Lundell family provided us with some images of a walkthrough that actually occurred with Steve back in the 1970s, late 1970s, when this was being, obviously here, sold, of some of the images, the last images that probably were taken of the buildings in the configurations that they were. And you can note that there are a lot of windows that are broken out. You can imagine the decadence of not having the grasses mowed and the trees trimmed and light. Next slide. Just another one. Next. And the staircase looking back up. So as you walk up the staircase the next time, think of coming to that top step, and that now we walk a sidewalk back down to the parking lot. You're walking through the Grand Hall in the middle of that building. And you can feel it if you know it. And now you do. Next slide. And next slide. Another thing that I caught an image of, it's part of that same photo group, but when this was sold, the original gates, the iron gates, were still on these, on the arch. They're gone now. And this is looking into the park, and there are no trees. The Iowa Great Lakes Trail comes right through here, across the face of that. You go in, there's trees down both sides. In this area over here, there's a marsh that's just, become decadent, grown up. And of course now it's all asphalt, the parking lot going to the boat ramps to the right. And up on the hill we've got, a restroom facility and access to the lake and 3 little pavilions. Next slide. Got sold for $375,000 to the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, technically in October of '86, and is still owned by them. Next slide. Now, transition into the now portion. So, Spirit Lake Protective Association said, underutilized, let's do something about it. What are we going to do? We got a bunch of old people who are board members for the Spirit Lake Protective Association. We can't do a whole lot, but we can do some stuff. So, we took on a project 2 years ago of redoing all the picnic tables in several of the parks around the lake. This one being one underneath the big covered area. Next slide. And here is the well, the pile of equipment accumulated to make it happen. Next slide. And the smiling faces of those who did it. Yours truly, right? President Kirk Gay. The good news was we got full permission from Iowa DNR to do it, and they actually provided us with the stain Industrial Iowa Green. I don't know if it's prison green or not, but it's at least state park green. But we got a lot of it, and it didn't cost us anything, and we ended up putting, we did, I think it ended up being like 77 picnic tables, completely sanded and completely redone, and the DNR then replaced wood where it was necessary. So the picnic tables around Spirit Lake are in as good a condition as they could be as picnic tables, except for in Marble Beach. Those we didn't do. There's 300 within Marble Beach alone, so we didn't mess with those. Next slide. Just an image of folks standing around doing it. Now, I needed to make sure this one was in here because Thelma Madigan came to help as well as one of our board members, Karen Baker. Thelma actually lives in that area of the wonderful Orleans Hotel, on the site of the Orleans Hotel. And she's been involved in several of our projects as well, and I wanted to thank you guys for coming this evening. Next slide. So here was the hillside at Templar, and we had to figure out how we were going to be able to keep all of the 70-year-olds in safe positions, sans any power equipment, so that they didn't cut off any of their remaining limbs, and get this stuff up on the hill so Iowa DNR would be able to dispose of it for us. So we had a process and it worked. Next. We actually cleared, here's the staircase right here. We cleared this side, and then the remaining pieces over here is much, much more difficult. Next slide. This is the before look on the slide, and the very first person who actually helped me right here in this corner when we did a test cut was right there. He's in the room today. So I just wanted to make sure that we had everybody involved. Next slide. And that's what it looks like now. Amazing that you can go from not being able to see, because Spirit Lake Protective Association actually does the July 3rd fireworks on Big Spirit Lake. And we had moved the fireworks a little bit further to the north, and we touted that everybody needed to go to Templar Park to watch the fireworks. They went. They couldn't see them. It was really one of those oops moments in our life. So we spent a considerable amount of time and effort to clear it off. Now they have a place they can see the fireworks. Next slide. And that's what it looks like now from the lakeside. Next slide. And the crew, next slide. Purple Martin colonies put up, first year of its use, 22 units, produced almost 100 Purple Martins in its first year of the colony. And it really appropriate that they had declared it, the whole Templar Park area, to be a bird haven anyway, so we didn't know that, but we're going to play it up for all it's worth. Next slide. This is kind of the configuration of what the property looks like now. Most of the action's right in here. The road that we've talked about a lot. This is where the kind of the marshy area is at. This area over here is mostly parking lot, access to the boat ramp. Next slide. One of the things that we have going from a Spirit Lake Protective Association group is what we call our visioning process. This is a document that's on our website. This is just the front page that speaks to next phases. One of the things we thought about here is we're talking about the last 100 years. I want it to be the thinking of the next 100 years. And the continuity there is, there have been cool things that have happened, Yeah, that's what history's all about, is understanding the cool things that happen. But the proactive side of it is thinking of what the next 100 years is going to look like. And that's part of what's going on now. Next slide. Again, this is where we're looking. These are areas, and I'm not going to go into any detail about those, but there are a whole bunch of things that have been considered in a whole bunch of locations on Templar Park, looking forward for the next 100 years. And the good news about it all is we've been working closely with Iowa DNR and have essentially full cooperation. I can't say that we've got anything less than full cooperation. The limitations, of course, are personnel and dollars, both on our side and their side. Next one. So, Templar Park, then and now. We were going into the park, thinking about what's over there. Now we're going out thinking about what's next. And Mary has a little bit of promo going on here. So let's open it up to questions. Comments, and I'm sure by now Max has probably come up with something else to share.
I bid on those gates.
He bid on the gates. Do you know where they went?
I don't know where they're at now.
Get on that, would you?
But then I got to saying, what the hell would I do with that?
They said you were always a wise man.
You know, we'd also really like to know what happened to the plaque that was on the arch too, because that's been removed.
Yeah, there was a
That would have been a historical plaque about Templar Park itself.
I know. We went out there when they were tearing that down, some of us, and we said, you know, the plaques, the emblems, stuff like that, they said, take whatever you want. But we took a lot of them, and we had them in the Masonic Lodge in Spirit Lake. Somehow, the Masonic Lodge of Iowa found out we had them. They wanted them, they got them, they're all in the museum in Cedar Rapids.
Oh, road trip. Everybody that's got a convertible, we're going to meet.
I got a Prius.
Well, thank you. Good clue.
Yeah.
Good clue. Other thoughts? Other comments? Yes, sir.
What led to the demise? You know, huge facility, looked like it's very popular.
Good question. What led to the demise? You can imagine that the cost to even get it started was huge. And one of the things I didn't mention because of time as much as anything is that in the development of the whole series of properties, the costs were really always an issue. They actually raised the head tax on each one of the nights in the state $1 to try to raise money. They were always short of money. And you had the first building burn or blow down, second building burned down, so money was lost in those events. $135,000 put into the next one, and they didn't. It was designed well for the times, but it wasn't designed well enough to be retrofit. So you had gang bathrooms and you had gang showers, not individual room showers. They were all made out of concrete. There were square little boxes. There was no air conditioning. The windows probably were inadequate to be open for ventilation. They had a central furnace of some sort, I don't know what it was, 4 fireplaces. It was only open short periods of time. They didn't charge people lots of money to use it. It was basically free to the families that were part of the group. It was only later in the years that they started opening it up for more public consumption and brought in conferences. There was a lot of conference work done with the Iowa High School Athletic Association that came in, and they had events there, particularly coaching camps and basketball camps and things like that that were brought to the shorelines. But only in later years. 1965, I think is when Max, somewhere in that period, Max was speaking of the possibility of condos. The people that owned or were using the properties, had leases for the houses on the shoreline, were told that they had a certain date to get out of their cottages, or the cottages were either going to be torn down or moved back to the second or third row on the property, and that condos were going to be built. And it was during a period of time when the Templars didn't want to manage the property much at all and had given it to a third party, not property-wise, but control, and basically was going to go into a private ownership and converted then to condominiums. And it was the ordinances of the city of Orleans that restricted the development of the condos.
Thank God.
And then how much money to try to retrofit? It had to have torn the whole thing down and built it to a modern standard, electricity and light.
And what year was it finally torn down?
1979. Yep. Construction, and okay, and another piece, I talked to Dewey Grotehouse, who was highway department personnel. It was torn down and buried right there on site, essentially in the marsh, and there were field tiles, of course, coming from the west side of the road across into that drainage, and so the obligation was to replace all of those field tiles, and they did. The whole building got torn down, hauled over to basically a hole, and put into the hole.
So when they had the fires and the tornadoes, did they have like insurance back then, or was that just out of pocket?
It was largely out of pocket. What I found was about half, it seemed like about half of the amount was covered by insurance, but they were clearly underinsured. So there was an unexpected expenses pretty much left and right as they were going along because of those disasters. But they did have insurance, but it was only partial. Dean?
The other thing I kind of found out, one of the parties that owned it, that they couldn't retro because it was all concrete and the interior walls were really thick. And in order, the cost to try to take out the foundation, basically interior, would destroy the building.
Yeah, I don't know if we were able to hear the full comment, but the comment really is that the concrete was really thick, difficult to do the renovation, and they would have had to pretty much destroyed the integrity of the structure to fix the structure, and so that ended up being a large part of it, and that's by someone who knows concrete.
John, I think we have a couple people here who are former employees.
Do we have employees,
Yeah,
people who actually work? Little hand raised, there we go. Any comments? Well, I know Frank was, and we've got two at least.
Nancy was...
I worked in the kitchen, and I suppose we got $1 an hour too. There was an old, and that would have been, I think, about 1965. I wasn't old enough to drive, I was just a kid. And we could stay there. There was a big old house that then sort of turned into like a dormitory.
So you had a residential area that you could actually stay in?
We could stay there, which, you know, when you can't drive, that was an advantage, I guess, but it was like, as you were talking about, like the grand ballroom and that kind of thing, we weren't allowed in there.
Really?
The kitchen was kind of to the southwest of the building. You can see a little portion sticking out.
Yeah,
in the dining area was there, and that was our domain, and we really weren't allowed to go in. So, you know, I look at it now and I think, dang, I wish I'd been a little more.
You weren't allowed to.
Wish I'd been a little braver. Going in there.
And
I was kind of shy.
We've spoken to Frank. Frank actually was a young man out there, and he would go out during the summer of 71. 71, ride his bicycle out there every day, as I recall, and help. His one claim to fame was he's taken out and reinstalled every one of the screen windows in the place at least twice.
That wasn't fun, yeah. That and raking those, when you call them greens, they were sand greens, and so every morning you go out to rake the sand greens smooth again. So.
Very good. Norm.
I lived across the highway from the arch for 17 years, 1960 to 76. I watched it go down, Art Hagedorn with a big iron ball,
So you got to watch that process happen with a big wrecking ball over the course of a year? Wow, it's amazing. Amazing. Thanks, Norm.
We used to go over there for dinner quite often, and that was in the little white house where they had the kitchen and everything. It was open to the public.
Yeah, in the latter years, it did open to the public and you could go to dinner, and I think there were quite a few folks that actually ended up going to dinner there.
Another sad thing that happened, I was in snowmobile season in the late 70s, no, early 70s. And myself and another fellow were over on the golf course. He just got a new snowmobile. I had just an old something or other. And my daughter was with me, Mindy. And so Don Mangle and I went over to the farthest spot on the north of the golf course. And we were going to race to see who got down to the trees. He hadn't been down there much. And there were raised greens, tee boxes. So I knew my way around and he didn't. I beat him by probably 15 yards, but he kept going wide open. Flew off of the one tee box and was airborne, and I had already turned to the right, and he came down and his ski hit my leg, and my snow boot on that leg was around the other direction from that building. So my daughter went over and ordered the ambulance.
I got an ambulance for you.
Yeah, 2 o'clock.
Very good.
Experiences.
Well,
What year did
yeah.
the pavilion go down? That was later, late 80s?
The last pavilion would have
Yeah.
gone down, let's see, Marcia, when did, 90s, in the 90s,
From an 80, so, yeah, maybe something like that, 83, 84.
83, 84. I didn't get the exact date on that one, yeah. Well,
Does anyone know what that represents?
actually not precisely, but it is all representative of the symbolism of the Knights Templar themselves. Isaac,
What are the words on that?
I think they're Latin. I don't know what they are.
I've got a translation.
You sorted it out.
No, one of our board members, John Sandy, knows Latin.
Got it.
I just need to get the, what he said.
But I see it in the symbolism for the Knights Templars, and so they actually have constructed it consistent with the pattern that they use for their identification purposes. Symbolizing, obviously, the cross and the king itself.
If you look at the sword that we have out in our display case, that emblem is on several different locations on the sword and the sheath.
I just don't know. Marsha?
You'll also find that same look with the cross and the crown. The original postal box is there by the highway, and there's a post that sticks up. And on the top of that post is that same cross and crown, still existing today.
I asked John Sandy, a local judge actually, who knows Latin, what the words here mean. And it means, in this sign, thou shalt conquer, or what the words mean around here.
Thou shalt conquer.
In this sign, thou shalt conquer.
Yeah, the history, of course, of the Knights Templar, by and large, really goes back to medieval times, but the little bit of reading that I've done talks about kind of the early phase that was involved in the Holy Land and the wars of the Middle Ages. And then a new time when they kind of revitalized as an element of Christianity and largely a Christian group, but not exclusively a Christian group, that fought really for Christian faith and leadership, things progressive. and there was an element of the Freemasonry. My father, God rest his soul, was a 50-year Mason, and I never really knew much about what he did. Didn't talk much about it, but he was, you know, with great honor did it. So, a lot of secret society stuff.
Masonry starts out, Freemasonry is the first 3 degrees. Then you can either branch off to go with, this was
York Rite.
York Rite and Scottish Rite. This was a York Rite that ended up there. And then after those two is when you can become a Shriner. So a Shriner is actually the highest part of the Masonic world.
Well, thank you all for coming this evening. Be glad to stay around a little while if you have other questions.
Thank you.
Well, it's quite a group. We look forward to other events, and one of these days I'm doing the Orleans Hotel.
And I would like to just take a second and invite you to our next History Lives talk, which will be April 21st, another Thursday evening. This one will be at the Mazer Monarch Lodge out at the Nature Center. And what it is going to be is pretty darn special. I was going through a filing drawer here a while ago and I found a box of glass slides. They were obviously very old. And Sue did some research on these and we found some documentation that these slides came from Albert Sharp, who happened to be Abby Gardner Sharp's grandson. And so we started looking through these slides and realized that they were very old and very special. And then we found a listing of what the slides were, and we also found a program. Evidently, Abby's grandson Albert gave programs using these glass slides to school children, to people around the state. They were a big deal. These slides probably haven't been seen for 80 years. We took them to a photo shop and had them digitized. And we will be showing these slides, again, first time in probably 80 years, for our next History Lives series. Ed Purdy, who is a docent at the Abby Gardner Cabin, is writing a script for this program, and it's in conjunction with the Friends of the Abby Gardner Cabin group that we're doing this. So it's going to be a big deal, a really, really big deal. I hope you can come. Yes?
You said that's going to be at the Nature Center?
It's going to be at the Nature Center. Reason being, we're expecting more people, and also they have, they actually have audio-visual equipment that works well.
Is that at 7 o'clock also?
And we'll be at 7 o'clock on the evening of April 21st.
And it's the Mazer building, not the regular Nature.
It's not the regular building, it's the new Mazer Lodge to the west of the Nature Center building. So I hope you can all come there. And thank you, John. This was just tremendous tonight, just tremendous. And Max.
And thank you.
Max and Megan and Eli and Christopher, thank you for coming tonight and for the donations.
Thanks, everybody.
So glad you could come. Thank you all for coming.